So we're going to have a Q&A from the audience. Anybody who wants to ask a question, there's a mic in the front, right? And please raise your hand.
If I may, actually, I want to sort of like go back so that people, if you want to see those points I just mentioned.
So let me kick it off a little bit. I've heard in the last couple of days that there are lots of common things between Singapore and also Israel. That both. Israel is of course, slightly larger country, perhaps, but nevertheless, in terms of the issues in kind of fostering entrepreneurship, that both countries have to be thinking outside of their own country in order to, whether it's a market size or getting talent or even getting funding. What is your view about this kind of comparison between Israel and Singapore?
Apart from being the chosen people, actually, it's they have I would say unfair advantage, but they do have an advantage because there's a lot of Jews actually in America. So, for example, some of the companies, when they started in Israel, and quickly they would be able to replicate it in the East Coast, like for example in Boston, New York. Even they don't need to go to Silicon Valley to establish because it's much closer. And they got good funding. I saw quite a number of VC actually there. They have that kind of heritage in a way. They feel the affinity. So somehow Singapore do not have that kind of advantage on that. So that is one. And secondly, I think they have a lot of pressure. They live. They basically surrounded by neighbors. Actually, can be hostile. So if you look at the security technology, it is one of the top in the world. I won't say desperation, but I think they need to do that. Singapore, yes, but we don't have that kind of neighbors in a way to force us to come up with that kind of technology. So actually, that in a way, they have an advantage against Singapore, and also the government also put a lot of effort to promote the entrepreneurship, the startup.
Right. Just to follow on a little bit, there's a book that has been written on entrepreneurship in Israel called Startup Nation.
Yep.
And so it may be an ideal at some point for somebody to write about Singapore as well in the same vein, right?
Okay. I think there's some people are writing the books. I'm not wrong, right? Bill actually is. We have been seeing, one lady author is trying to sort of write something on that as well. But I can imagine that look at the journey. I just mentioned, not 200 years. Look at just say it in the last 20 or 30 years. Singapore has changed from a very labor-intensive type of economy to so-called, knowledge economy. And in fact, they want to make Singapore become a smart nation. Okay, in a way, want to improve the quality of life. Probably is similar to what South Korea is, to become a creative economy, to make everybody happy. So I believe that it is time actually to look at, take a snapshot, what happened in the last 30 years. Maybe you want to start some projects here with some of your alumni.
Yeah, that's an idea. So, and I don't want to dominate any of the conversation. Any other questions from the audience? Don't feel shy.
Yes, that's the lady.
I'll break the ice.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Eddie. That was really actually a great presentation.
Thanks.
Thank you. So, Dean, following up on your comments about Tel Aviv and you bringing that up, you're probably familiar with Technion and sort of the Israeli government incubator type of startup organization. Do you think something like that would be viable here, or some kind of collaboration between Singapore and the Israeli government, et cetera, being very similar types of countries, startup nations? Do you think that would be something feasible to explore, either on a IDA educational type basis or just on a city-state business model type of basis for incubation?
Sorry, I just want to clarify. Is it you're talking about collaboration between Singapore and Israel?
Well, both actually. Just what are your thoughts on having a Technion type of organization here in Singapore that would sort of foster startups? Because as you said, the government contributes a lot of
right.
R&D money, but
Can I answer it partially, and then I'll turn it over to you. So Technion is really like the MIT of Israel, that you're talking about Technion, which is a university which is focused on science and technology. And Technion has the incubator is called Technion Seed, And so in my previous life as Dean of Smith School of Business, we actually had a partnership with Technion. And our students from our MBA program, between their first and their second year, would go and spend their 10 weeks of the summer at Technion Seed. And so Technion Seed was where the technology of the professors and the research at Technion ended up in the incubator, waiting to get funded to actually set up, become a company. And our MBA students would help these companies write the right business plans. They would do the market research. They would, pitch it in front of venture capitalists and those kinds of things. So, if I can kind of restate your question in this way, that back to you. What is the role of universities in Singapore, right, in really fostering entrepreneurship?
If I may say, I basically have some relationship in the Free University here, the NUS, NTU, and SMU in different roles and all that. All of them actually have their entrepreneurship center. Basically, it is to encourage students. And in fact, one I would say that they're doing very well is one program is from NUS. It's called the NOC. What is the full name? Basically, it is to send the undergraduate student to oversee, for example, like Silicon Valley, to intern for 1 year and then come back to finish the degree. And it started quite a number of years ago. In fact, one of my co-founders in Brentology actually joined that program and came back at the age of 25 or 26. He became my co-founder. And I also hired quite a number of them actually from that program. When I look at that, and I realize that, Singapore cannot replicate what happened in Silicon Valley. And in fact, I remember a couple of years ago, the co-founder of Apple Inc., Steve, what's the guy's name?
Steve Jobs?
Not Steve Jobs.
Wozniak.
Yes, Wozniak, yes.
Wozniak.
And he said, Singapore will never have an Apple. So I totally agree, actually. We will not be able to create an Apple Inc., It's because, of all sort of a restriction we have, the government, no democracy, whatever, he mentioned. So, but I say that, yes, I agree. I don't think we can create a Facebook, we can create, a Google, but it doesn't mean that, and also we cannot create an Apple like that, but I joke about that. Probably we can create a rambutan, a papaya, a coconut. Something is more different flavor that suits Singapore. We would not be able to create something exactly the same as what happened in, but maybe we create some mid-sized company that, our entrepreneur probably would be able to swallow, would be able to chew. You have to set the expectation right. Do you think in Singapore, I don't want to pour cold water, would be able to scale a company to become like Facebook, just based in Singapore? It may be very hard, let's face it, based on the existing environment. Okay. Now, I'm not talking about forever and ever, but what I'm saying based on what really happened right now. So what we need actually it is to decide what sort of entrepreneur will fit Singapore, or what sort of entrepreneur will be attracted to Singapore. Now, to go back to your questions, right? I think the university has been working with Israel University. Even though our government worked closely with the Israel government in various ways. But one thing actually it is, there's something that we still cannot replicate what happened in Israel. And probably we'll just take note on that and then we will learn, thank you very much, we'll find our own way to succeed. Sorry, that's the ladies,
yeah.
that's the question there.
Hi, thank you, Eddie, for a very informative talk. I would like to ask, because you mentioned creating a new market, but for entrepreneurs, I find that in Singapore, maybe Singaporeans, I think that they are a bit of a slow adopters of technology. So for entrepreneurs, what do you think that it's better to create an awareness of the technology overseas and then bring it into a new market in Singapore, or create a whole new market in Singapore itself? Thank you.
Well, a lot of people also ask me this question, where can you get the idea? And I said, you know, in fact, you just walk along the street, you have a lot of idea already. In fact, I keep telling, you know, my family, I say, you know, I mean, why we need to drive the car? You know, the car, you know, the format is already 100 years old, you know, never changed in a way. We should fly. And I believe probably in 30, 50 years later, we all can fly. There's no road. No, that is the requirement, because we see that the traffic jam, you know, is so bad. When you see a problem, you want to answer, what is the solution? It's not the technology. So it is a market, right? Recently, you know, last year I have a pet project, and I find that a lot of people couldn't have a good sleep. So can we help people to sleep better? So I start to research and all that, and I say, you know, okay, I want to sort of use you know, the neural wave, you know, try to read your brain actually to understand what are you at, where are you at now? Can I sort of like, you know, stimulate your brain wave actually help you to sort of sleep better? Now the thing is, it's not about the neural technology to start with. It's about the problem. So then, you know, you have to, in a way, the problem that is the market. Then you go and find the technology. And I believe that that is the key to, you know, and of course, you know, the problem I will also recommend actually, don't look at the small problem. Please look at the big problem. Because the big problem, then you have a sort of better chance actually to attract money to invest in your venture. I don't know whether I answer your questions. Yes.
Yeah, it's a question up there.
Thank you. As somebody who runs a biotech startup with Biopolis, I can say that I 100% agree with those points that you've made. I think it's, in terms of, well, from my personal point of view, changing the risk-averse mindset of the Singaporean to being more entrepreneurial. I think that to some extent, the problem relates to the government, which is very supportive, but to some extent is almost too supportive in a lot of ways. You know, we have, and I say this to the people in Biopolis as well, you know, in Biopolis they have 75 people in their tech transfer division, and they don't have 75 people in the biotechnology part of startups in Biopolis. And that's because the KPIs that they all get given are to get a big deal with a big multinational. And all the ethos of the science and technology transfer within, and also within the institutes of the scientists in Singapore, to get a big deal. They don't want, there's not an encouragement for them to go out and form their own companies. And so one of the ways in which it's now changing, and there's a bunch of us who are involved in trying to change that ethos within the science community than Singapore. But the only way in which it's going to be is if there is support for, much more support for the concept of people taking their own ideas that they're generating in their own laboratories and forming their own companies. And there isn't at the present time the ecosystem within Singapore to be able to do that at the kind of level that you can do it in Cambridge in the UK, for instance, or in Silicon Valley, or in Toronto, where I used to work as well. And there are a number of, and there's things like, there's not laboratory space, which you can fit in and fit out of cheaply. It's all very expensive. If you want to get a laboratory in Singapore, somebody moves out, they strip it out, and you've got to build another one. And that costs you $1 million. So you can't do it. Whereas in Cambridge, Oxford, Toronto, there was always lots of space you could move in and out of. So there's not an encouragement for people to take that risk. And I think that's, and that, the final point is that, people have said to me who work at Diopters, how do we get more startups? And I say, well, it's people like you who are very bright, very well-trained scientists who've been at business schools, come back, done a lot of science, and you're sitting working in government agencies of different types. You should be working where I'm working. You should be forming the companies, not bringing people like me in. And until you change that but they do say, right, we've got a job. We've got a nice, stable job. And you've got to change that mindset by giving people the encouragement to do that. Maybe even support their salaries for a while so that they don't have to take a huge risk. And only in that respect can we change the mindset of all the very talented people who Singapore spent a lot of money training to form new companies, especially in the science industry.
Well, if I may answer, actually, I want to quote one example. There's a quantum computing company. It's called Q-Trip, right? They started in 1999. Recently, they got 2 orders, one from Google and one from NASA. And the CEO actually also complained. And they say, in the early day, when they started, it is basically you cannot find investor. Even though in America, well, they're based in Canada, but they have big establishment in the valley. And it's because that is something that they cannot find an investor, even in Silicon Valley. It is so capital intensive in the quantum computing, and it is so new that they cannot figure out, the formula, when am I going to make some money? Now, if you look at it from the investor point of view, to them actually very simple. They have the LP to push them. I mean, the limited partner. They are the investor. They are the VC, but they also have investor. They have to sort of return, the money, and with the profit to their limited partners. So I look at that is, if anybody want to go into that kind of projects, I would strongly recommend that you need to have some probably institution, government to back you up from the beginning. If not, it is, I can tell you, even in Silicon Valley, they find it very hard to get into, even, say, I just quote you an example. In fact, the CEO went into TechCrunch to talk about it only a few weeks ago. You can still listen. I think it's an interesting interview. Even though with this kind of a cutting-edge technology, they also find it very hard. It's because it's capital intensive. So if you are going to, and anybody actually, an entrepreneur, you want to get into very capital intensive kind of a venture, you need to think very carefully, where can you get the capital? You have to either come to university to back you up, or the government, or some big customer you manage to secure to help you to do the proof of concept from the beginning. If not, it is very hard to start, I have to say. Yes. Yes, the lady there.
Good afternoon, Eddie. Thanks a lot for a very inspiring presentation. I'm more interested in knowing your personal experience when you first created your first venture. Because I think a lot of people, they may like the idea of having a business, starting up a business, but a lot of thought has to go into planning. I'm interested to know who inspired you, what thought processes were at play when you decided to move from having a regular stable job, I would assume, into being an entrepreneur. So that would be very interesting to know from your personal experience.
That is a 2 hours talk. So the short answer, I would say that compare with First of all, you need to want to do business. I mean, I don't know how to explain, I mean, some people just want to be an administrator. Some people just want to be entrepreneur. And I know that from young, actually, I want to do business. Probably partly because of my upbringing. My father was, opened grocery shops. So work day and night and all that, I need to help out. So it's business, transactions. So I'm not sort of in, my parents is not those like middle class, work in a corporate and all this, no. So that probably inspired me. Basically, I see people buy and sell and things like that. So from young, actually, I like to do business, so it helps me. But I think, what I like to share, is how can you sort of make that decision to jump from a corporate world to become an entrepreneur? That is a big jump. You need to get a lot of support. For example, your family support. If you're married, actually, you need your spouse support, the agreement and all that. Because I can tell you, just to share with you, I see that, some middle-aged entrepreneurs. So that means they are 35 and above. They're more experienced. That's good. They're not young kids. They're not 25 or below 30. But in Singapore, this kind of entrepreneur, one of the problems actually is when they got married, whether they're the gentlemen or men or ladies, is their spouse actually, if they are not supportive enough, they may not be able to support your kind of entrepreneurial lifestyle. Entrepreneur is no day and night, I can tell you. Be assured that there's no such thing, let's stop. Because your mind just continue to think non-stop. You will not have holiday, you forget about, all sort of things, you is 1000% focus on your business. And you have to move fast. So when something happens, you have to respond, and at the same time, you also need to predict what may happen. It's extremely intensive. So you can imagine that in the next, if you want to get into that in the next 3 to 5 or even 7 years, it will be like that. So if you do not have that kind of support from your family, or even financial support, you need to think twice. So not all people can be entrepreneurs. It's not that, it's a very prestige being an entrepreneur. It's just, you have to choose. Sorry. Yes.
Hello, yeah. Eddie, actually, I'm not so sure why we are so obsessed with entrepreneurship in the context of Singapore. Okay, or should we actually accept the reality? Would a Facebook or a Google survive, even with the same people, say for example, if they moved to Singapore, would they have survived? Would they have made it? Look, not just Singapore. Hong Kong is renowned to have entrepreneurship. Can you quote me one success story, really in the big time of an entrepreneur in Hong Kong? Or even in Korea? I mean, is our culture such that we believe in a large group? I mean, what's wrong with basically, for example, Singapore, right? The shipbuilding industry, Sembawang, Keppel Corp, all right, are doing very well. The people who run them are making tens of millions a year. So, I mean, I just don't understand why we are so obsessed with entrepreneur, because is it realistic for Singapore to have something like that, right? If it's not, why don't we actually leverage and capitalize on our strength, which is technocrats, all right? In Korea, Samsung, chances are that it's going to beat Apple, right? A lot of people predict that. Okay, why? Samsung is a conglomerate. It's got this muscle behind it. Singapore, maybe one of the GLC or the TLC, be the one. And the individual are going to do very well as well, financially, running those corporations. So I'm just wondering aloud as to whether, in fact, we should capitalize on our strength. Because the males go through national service, trained to be team players, not individual thinker, team players, to do well. All right? And then after NS, while they're still doing the reservation, you continue to go back and say, be team players, team players, team players. Perhaps it's not in our DNA to break out and take risks like that. And at the end of the day, right, even if you succeed in the context of Singapore, all right, I'm not trying to belittle what you have done, for example. I am sure the CEOs of some of TLCs are equally as well off as you are financially, right? And at the end of the day, yes, you have a greater satisfaction of creating something new, okay? But there are a big chance also that most will not make it. So, and maybe, as I said, it's back to our DNA and our culture. Okay, that's my observation. And lastly, assuming that we want to pursue this road about entrepreneurship, what would you advise the Singapore government to do?
Just to answer your, I would say that, being, for example, in Hong Kong, quote me any example, I mean, there's a big entrepreneurs, it's called Sir Run Shaw, just passed away, I think, in fact, there's so many businessmen, I mean, that's another name, entrepreneur, just, yeah. In fact, there's a lot of businessmen actually is in Singapore or even in Hong Kong. I think what the difference, or Singapore, or even Hong Kong or Korea, want to do is, businessman, if you talk about just trading, Singapore has been doing it many years. Nothing wrong, actually. I think what they want to do, actually, it is because trading, a lot of people can make a living. But it also depends on a lot of external environment. And if a financial crisis came, actually, people would just pull out, Singapore. The IP is not here. So I think, it is like, do not want to put all the egg into one basket. So they probably want to nurture, another breed of people to you so-called entrepreneurs. That means you build your IP. For example, now you mentioned Samsung will take over Apple. But China probably have different idea because they have Xiaomi, they have Huawei, probably produce. They are all entrepreneurs, by the way. They are all, I mean, Huawei is a bit big, but they are all entrepreneurs. Xiaomi also is an entrepreneurs. They are not from the big corporate. And I would say that, the difference between the big corporate and entrepreneurs, why Xiaomi, started only a few years ago, now can take on Samsung in China. They sold about 100,000 phones within 83 seconds online. It's gone. Okay, that is the last figure. I can't get one. I want to have one also. So the difference, if I want to summarize, is not the big who eat the small. It is the fast who eat the slow. In the entrepreneur world, that's why, in Silicon Valley, one of the major difference is why IBM, I used to work in IBM, why IBM keep buying companies? It's because they cannot retain that kind of talents in the environment to continue to excel. So they have to look at outside, oh, this is a great idea, and actually already grow to a certain degree, then they buy you. And they build up this kind of ecosystem. In a way, you have a startup, build to a certain degree, got investment, build to a certain market, then a big company go and buy. So it becomes an interesting ecosystem. So, so to answer, I don't have a short answer to you. I mean.
Sorry, I'm asking for clarification. I mentioned that because of Singapore and Hong Kong and to some extent Korea, because I am talking in the context of you not having a big home market. So the situation you mentioned about those in China, yes, because they have the advantage of a large home market. So that's what I'm trying to differentiate. So Singapore has a small home market. So that's a constraint that we cannot get out of.
So a couple of things, I mean, just to add to what you're saying. I mean, you answered it very well, because the conversation is not about changing the entire Singapore into entrepreneurs, but that's another vehicle. Clearly, people are still going to use their technocratic expertise to, do shipbuilding or software companies or whatever they want to do. But I think entrepreneurship would be a complement to that rather than taking it away. Now, you spoke about the home markets. Two points, and I'm going to kind of wonder sometimes what we talk about culture. So 2 points. One is the home market issue is really, at some level, could be limiting, but need not be limiting. So I spoke about Israel at the beginning, because we all now do SMS. It used to be called SMS, now it's called texting. The entire SMS started at Israel. Okay? The first company that was doing SMS was AOL, doing online, which is around 2000. But the technology for that was started by one entrepreneur in Israel, and essentially has taken over the world. So you can imagine, just because we're a small country doesn't mean that the whole market needs to limit it, because the world needs technology, the world needs services, the world needs lots of things, and you can spawn that. The second thing is about culture. I mean, people used to say, and in America in particular, people used to say, oh, China, they just imitate, they don't know how to be entrepreneurs, they don't know how to be innovative. They're just an imitator country. They will reverse engineer things, and then they will essentially steal your IP and reverse engineer and so on and so forth. But as you said, Huawei now is giving Cisco a run for its money. In fact, Huawei's technology is better than Cisco's technology. Many emerging economies are preferred to buy Huawei's technology. In consumer electronics, we are talking about Samsung, but here, don't forget here, because if you go to Walmart or you go to Best Buy, these are major companies in the US, most of the appliances are now here, which is Chinese, not even Samsung, certainly not. So I think this thing about culture, I think, need not be a limiting conversation, because the world changes over time, and I think part of this thing about conversation about entrepreneurship, perhaps is also a conversation where you have young people who might help change some of the cultures, so that these things can coexist. So I'm not saying
I agree. It's a complementary. If I may add, actually, is about 1.5 years ago, there's a very big Singapore, the GLC actually invite me to address to the management team in the retreat. So I'm the only speaker. After the meetings, actually, I need to speak for an hour to the 80-something senior management, plus the middle management. And the topic, actually, they asked me to speak is Build to Last. So there's a book called Build to Last. So of course the idea actually it is like, because they're a big company, is you want to build to last. And so then I say, I don't think I'm the right person to speak about this topic, because I build to sell. So then I say, no, please come and talk, just to share, your thought. So when I talk about that, in fact, I said, even though in a big company, it doesn't mean that you don't have the entrepreneurship, that kind of spirit.
Yeah.
It's because, let me quote you one example. SAP, about 2 years ago, they start their incubation center. And in fact, 1 year ago, exactly 1 year ago, they established one in Singapore. Why they established the incubation center is because they realized that, similar to just what I quote the example in IBM, they cannot keep the talent. So instead of going out to buy, for example, if there's a colleagues, they really want their great idea, they want to leave SAP, they want to start his own business and all that, right? SAP say, okay, how about this, right? You become the CEO of this unit. You say this is your business plan, 18 months plan, right? And we will give you the funding, your salary, no need to reduce. We'll give you all the sales support and all that. You carry the CEO title of this unit. 18 months later, if you hit the target, you become a millionaire. Then 2 years later, they bought back 4 companies. Okay? Then I asked him, did the people actually leave after that, after they cash out and all that? No, most of them actually continue to stay on. So it's an interesting side. So I share this actually with that GLC, I say, because they also have the problem of losing talents, because people aspire, to do their own things. It's not that, corporate is not a good world, but people have different aspirations. It's something that I can't control. People want to be stable, but people want to have challenge. So then I share this idea with them. And I can tell you, interestingly, the audience is split into half. Half agree with me and half don't agree with me. So let it be.
So on that note, I've been told that we need to bring this conversation to an end in a formal way. But we're going to have a small reception, and you're welcome to talk to each other about this topic, or even talk to me or Eddie about this topic. So once again, I want to thank all of you for being here. It's been a pleasure to be hosting this Global Business Vision event, and we wish you, great success, whether you decide to become an entrepreneur or join, well-established corporate firm. Thank you.